Humanity Matters.
Hello, my name is Arnie Herz, and welcome to Habits of a Whole Heart. This podcast is part of the Humanity Matters series at the Holocaust Memorial Tolerance Center in Glen Cove, New York. Today, I am very pleased to have with me my dear friend, Doron Keren. Doron is the grandson of Ignacy
Chiger.
Is how you pronounce it.
I saved you.
Who survived the Holocaust under the streets of Lvov, Poland, at the time. Lvov is and Poland, and it's an absolutely extraordinary story. Ignacy wrote a manuscript in Polish, and Doron, his grandson, has taken the time and the energy and the resources to have that translated into English and to now bring it forth in this book that just published called Beneath the Lightless Sky. Did I get that right, Doron?
About 99.9% right.
Okay, perfect. Doron, to get 99.9% with Doron is a huge accomplishment. We've been friends for years. He is a great soul, and he is really bears witness to what his grandparents and his parents went through in the Holocaust. And I'm very, very pleased to have Doron here, whose book has become a New York, Amazon, #1 book in a certain category, right?
Well, it was #1 the day it was published, or
okay, #1 the day it was published.
In the category of historical biographies, but that's still pretty good.
That's pretty good. Well, Doron, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being here with us today to share your wisdom.
And thank you for having me, Arnie. I do appreciate this. Let's unpack this.
First, I want to know what the 0.01% that was not accurate. Let's clarify for our guests.
I think it was maybe the hesitation.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. All right. So here is, and the idea here is to do a 2-part series, but we'll see how it flows. The first part is to really talk about what actually happened beneath the streets, tell the story, and part 2 will be to really extract the deeper lessons. So, how did you first encounter your grandfather's testimony? How old were you? What happened?
Well, let's go back a bit.
Yes.
So we're going to I'm taking you back to 1975. And I watched my grandfather as a 14-year-old teenager type away, pour his thoughts out through his fingers on a Polish typewriter, day after day after day. We were living in Forest Hills at the time, Forest Hills, Queens. And my grandmother and my grandfather came for a very extended visit. I'll share a bit of a story with you.
They came from where?
So they were living in Israel at the time.
Okay.
So that's where my grandparents, and from both sides, and my parents with them, emigrated from Poland in 1956, when Poland let migrants leave, especially Jews, and they decided to emigrate to Israel, which is where I was born, 1961. So we moved to the United States in 1968. So 1975, my grandparents, my Ignacy and Paulina Chiger, well, at that time they had changed their name. The last name was Herowski, because in order to fit in Poland, you had to have a ski
right
at the end of your name. So I watched him type and type and type. Interesting story about this typewriter itself. So I remember this. I don't know why I remember this moment. I can hardly remember what I ate for breakfast, but I do remember this. And we were in the Lower East Side, maybe it was Delancey Street or Canal Street, and I was there with my parents and my grandparents, and they were looking for a Polish typewriter. Now, back in the day, since 1975, that area was Orthodox, Hasidic, and My grandfather stops on a corner of one of the streets and sighs, takes a deep breath, and says to all of us, "I'm home." It so reminded him of home. Now, I'll tell you what I saw. There were merchants on the street, vendors, street vendors with pickle barrels, and people in religious clothing walking to and fro quickly. And that reminded him of Lvov prior to the war. I just look at his face, and that just is seared into my memory. So he types and types and types and types for weeks at a time, weeks on end. And that story, that memoir, that manuscript, sat idle for decades. I have to tell you that also 6 months after he finished it, he passed away in Israel. So, but the story did not die with him. I think that 30 years after the war, what he wrote from memory, I think that there was some sort of a calling. He had made a connection. I don't know if it was with God or whatever it was with our family, that it was time to share his story, which he hadn't done before. So he did just that, and that, like I said again, that story sat. I heard the story in bits and pieces growing up. My mother would tell what happened in this event and that event and this event, but I never really put it all together until I read her book. So in 2008, The Girl in the Green Sweater was published, and it was co-written by Dan Paisner, who was my neighbor, and I convinced him to meet my mother.
So this is her story of what took place as a child's perspective.
Right. So this was a child's perspective. Now, since the manuscript was in Polish, and I can't read Polish, I never really understood what his thoughts were. I only know hers. And when I read her book, now I put it all together chronologically. But again, through the eyes of a child. So in her mind, and what she remembers, literally 4 walls around her, because she didn't leave the flats, the apartments, the barracks that she was in. She was always hidden, and then finally, they were hiding in the sewer as a family.
How old was she at the time?
So she was, I think, about between 5 and 8 years old, 5 and 9 years old.
During
and
this period of
this
time.
happened.
So I want to pause for a second, because what you're saying is a few very, very profound things. One is the world that was destroyed in Europe, the pre-war Lvov. And here's your grandfather in America, where he sees in the Lower East Side echoes and the essence of what that world was about, and how nostalgic that was and how meaningful that was, which really only shows the depth of loss of what was destroyed in Europe. And then, of course, the relief of him now being in America. And so impactful for you as a 14-year-old boy, how that's impacted you to this day. What is it, 50 years later? It's really quite amazing.
50 years later.
And you've got the story from your mother, from her perspective. I mean, just think about a girl between the age of 5 and 8 who spends those 3 formative years constrained, whether it's in a flat, an apartment, or it's in the sewers, which we'll get to in a second. Extraordinary cruelty of humanity, of what took place. And of course, obviously she survived and to tell the story. So anyway, back to what you were saying.
Right. I forgot what I was saying.
Yeah. So
that's how fast, that's my memory. I can remember 14 years, when I was a 14-year-old boy, the look on his face, the tears rolling down his face.
Well, you were talking about her perspective versus his perspective. You put the whole chronology together.
Right.
So what is, for listeners unfamiliar with Lvov during the war, like what was happening there? Why did not all of our listeners know about the Holocaust, or really have a lot of deep Holocaust literacy? What was actually happening in Lvov, why under a sewer? I mean, it just seems, if you're just a kid who doesn't know anything, think about explain what was happening.
So I'm going to start off in 1939. In 1939, Germany and Soviet Union signed a pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, essentially dividing up Poland. And then Germany attacks Poland from the west, and Russia quickly moves in as fast as they could from the east. Lvov is a city, now it's today's Lviv, Ukraine, but then it was Lvov, Poland. And it was sort of, it straddled the border of where Germany put their line and Russia put their line. And now this was under Soviet occupation. Soviets roll in, and my grandfather details this, which many historians, many people who don't know the story of the Holocaust really never understood, never knew this part. So Soviets take over Lvov and bring communism with them. They brought, as they said, paradise with them. And my grandfather refers to them as these unwanted guests. And he also says they came to liberate them. Well, he writes, they liberated us from all our possessions. Essentially, not just physical possessions,
so this is before they're in the sewers?
Way before. This is September-ish 1939.
So September 1939, the Soviets come in, they occupy Lvov.
Yes.
And so they're under Soviet occupation and basically stripped of their assets.
Stripped of their assets and their dignity, all their and moral possessions too. They were dehumanized, but psychologically.
Because
not
they were
physically.
Jewish or because they were Polish?
I think both.
Both. So the Soviets came in and they were not necessarily discriminating.
Right.
They were just against the Polish and...
Well, they brought in communism against the capitalist,
right.
Capitalism
and
itself.
And then eventually the Nazis take over Lvov.
So now, fast forward a couple of years to 1941, around June 1941, Nazis roll in. Germany rolls in. The Russia or Soviet Union is in retreat. And the atmosphere, the attitude was accepted. The Ukrainians actually joined the Germans.
Ukrainians or the Polish?
The Ukrainians. The Polish hated, there was a lot of hate going on.
But this was in Poland at the time, Lvov, right?
This was all happening in Poland, in Lvov.
Right.
I can only speak to what was happening in Lvov at the time. The mood of the people, you had...
So people were tormented by the Russians. So now someone's coming in that's liberating them. So they're hopeful it can't get any worse, and that's why they're sort of.
Well, here's the mood of the people. As quickly as I could sum it up, the Polish hated the Russians. They hated the Germans, but they hated the Russians more. The Ukrainians really hated the Russians. And they accepted the Germans because they thought that they were going to get their own country. That was the thinking at the time. The Jews were afraid of everybody.
Right.
They just thought that they knew how bad it was under Soviet rule. They didn't realize how much more awful it would be under Nazi occupation. So these things, it was like. It just unfolded over time. It wasn't like all of a sudden there were ghettos. I equate it to like, if you want to kill a frog in boiling water, you don't throw a frog in boiling water. You throw a frog in lukewarm water and just slowly turn up the heat until it boils in its own juice. That's what was happening to the Jewish people there. They couldn't believe that, it can't get any worse, but it got worse, and it got worse and worse, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse, and finally they were dead.
Right. Well, it brings for me a very important point, which is that you had three competing ideologies, worldviews. You had the capitalist ideology of what Poland was before the war.
Right. It was a Renaissance city.
And then you had the ideology of communism,
Yes.
of the Soviets, and you had the ideology of Nazism, fascism.
Yes.
And those played themselves out back and forth. Of course, we know that the capitalist ideology lost out to the communism, and then communism was taken over by the fascism, and it just was awful. And we'll get into this in the next episode of the implications for today. And I know you are very heightened about seeing that really we have just a limited number of worldviews, and there's only one that's going to result in a good thing, and history teaches us how dangerous it is. But let's fast forward because we don't have tons of time, and I know the story is really deep. What point did they have to go into the sewers, and what was that like?
So what was happening at the time? This was now under Nazi occupation, and now they
In June of 41.
We're going to go. We're fast forwarding to around June of 1942.
June of 42.
June of 42. There have been several actions up until this point. Each time, thousands of Jews have been killed. Kids have been ripped apart, ripped from their parents' hands, and parents have been sent to either Yanowska work camp, death camp, or the Piaski, which is the sand pits, which you know what that is.
Where
They were just shot and killed. So each time, each action, the ghetto is reduced to a smaller footprint. In Lvov, each time there are less and less Jews, until there were about 7,000 Jews left in the ghetto. We're starting out with 150,000 Jews in Lvov.
So you have 150,000 Jews. There's 7,000 Jews left, which means 143,000 Jews by June of 1943 have been killed. That's it. They've been killed.
Killed, removed, taken away.
Moved or put into concentration camps.
They're not there anymore.
Right.
Most of them killed. And killed right there.
Either there or killed in the concentration camps.
So my grandfather, it's almost by a process of elimination. How can we escape this? What can we do to keep living? When the walls are closing in, there are no partisans outside. No one is fighting for them. So he decides to come up with a plan. And this is a most extraordinary plan. He decides that he's going to use the sewer system underneath the streets to at least stay for a while and then leave the city through its sewer system out in a tributary, out someplace, and that was the original intent. That's not what happened, but that was the intent. But now, how do you get to the sewer? Right? You just can't open up a manhole because you'll be seen. So what happened was he knew that there was this one he called the barracks. It was, let's say, an apartment building, for argument's sake. And he knew that this was the closest location to where he thought would be the best place to dig down and hit the sewer. So the sewers it's an underground river with a giant vaulting that was about 2.5 feet thick. And he remembers vividly where the sewer system was because he was sitting on a hill in 1916 as a young boy watching the sewer system being built by the Italian prisoners from World War I.
Oh my God, wow.
And then the road goes over top and he remembers which building, and that's how he decides to pick this one place. They go down into the basement. He recruits 2 people. One of them lived in the building. Another one was a very resourceful man. And the 3 of them begin to dig through the basement on a particular angle. And he was really good at math. And he knew that if he dug too high, he would be above the vaulting. And then if he popped through the vaulting, they'd go right into the river.
What did your father do?
My grandfather?
Do? Yeah.
He was a craftsman. He was a businessman. He was a procurer of goods. He was a chameleon.
Amazing. So there's 7,000 Jews left. He knows that very few are going to survive. He sees the handwriting on the wall, already 143. He's the 1.5% that remains. And he realized that of that, very few people are going to survive. So he's so desperate. Here's a guy who was a successful guy with a family. He's now thinking he's got to go into a sewer system, and he figures out how to go into the sewer system by chance because he happened to be sitting on top of a hill when he was 16 years old and remembers that. I mean, you think about how brilliant this guy was, and here's his genius, a resourceful guy who's got to go into a sewer system to save his life. I mean, this is extraordinary. Think about you listeners. Think about you and your life and finding out that the only way you could survive is to go into a sewer system which had sewage. We're not talking about just a water system. We're talking about sewage that was coming through. How disgusting that must have been. And now you're down in the sewer. How do you survive? Where do you get food? There's no food. There's no shopping there. There's no beds. How did they survive in the sewers?
Well, so here's the story that's really interesting. First, let me go back just a bit because one of the most extraordinary parts of this book, and there are so many parts that I lost count, but one of them was how 3 men dug on a particular angle a tunnel for 2 days, and they wound up coming up to the vaulting, the concrete vaulting of this sewer pipe, which they spent another 8 days digging through, chopping through it, and finally come into this sewer in pitch black. So it's like a prison break in reverse.
Right.
Except this prison has no bars.
Right.
Breaking into a prison with no bars. So now, at one point early on, after they broke in and they've come up and down a couple of times to put in some supplies, they happened upon a sewer worker.
A sewer worker, okay.
Right. Well, he had a lantern and he saw them. They didn't know who he was. And they thought, well, that's it. They didn't know who this person was. It could have been Gestapo, SS. Turns out to be a sewer worker. Turned out to be their salvation, their angel. Originally, a
Jewish guy?
No, he was a Polish Catholic sewer worker and also a common thief. He was a petty thief. He spent his life in and out of jail. He really was the lowest station in life, and working in a sewer, of course. How poetic. My grandfather and him strike a deal, and this was for money. Obviously, transactional, that he would bring them to a shelter, find them a place to stay. Now, granted, they didn't know how long they were going to stay, and he would provide them with food, and in turn, he would get money for this action. So, but as time went by, as days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, this man fell in love with my family and fell in love with my grandfather, respected him, loved my mother and her brother, and Paulina brought her candles to light every Friday.
Amazing.
But he was also pious, and he went to church on Sundays and prayed not only for his family, but this family. This was his second family. And now, this is where the story really takes a turn. So Leopold Socha, this Polish sewer worker, decides to repent, decide that this is his way. If he saves these Jews, he will go to heaven. He will right the wrongs of his life and will be accepted to heaven. And that's what motivated him, because the money ran out. Eventually the money ran out. They didn't know how long they were going to be there. And we're now talking about 14 months of survival inside of a sewer. When they left the sewer, and the day finally came when the Russians pushed back the Germans and now was reoccupied under Russian rule, Soviet rule, he came out and he brought this ragtag group of 10. 20 went down, 10 came out. He showed them off to the local people, who were shocked. And he said, "These are my Jews. This is my work. The tragic part of this story happened a year later, and this is why my grandmother called him an angel. He shows up out of nowhere to save this family. Not a year goes by after he saves them. He's run over by a Russian army truck of drunken drivers, drunken soldiers, and his body lay over a sewer, and his blood runs into the sewer.
That's unbelievable. Doron, this is just an incredible story. Incredible. I mean, we see...
There's a lot of divine intervention here.
We see the depravity that they have to go into a sewer. We see ingenuity, and we see this petty thief who's among the righteous of the nations, who's acknowledged at Yad Vashem, righteous among the nations. But this is an incredible story, and we're at the end of our first episode, and I think I want to give people enough to say, I need to read this book. So everyone, please understand how much time and effort that your grandfather put into this book, how much time and effort you put into this book to bring out this story that really has so many enduring, essential lessons and meaning for us today. And we're going to delve into that in our second episode.
Great.
So thank you for that opening. And I think we could talk about this for many, many hours. I know you've been on the speaking circuit for your book and have had some very prominent speaking opportunities and podcasts and radio. And we'll delve into part 2 in a second. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in to episode 1 with Doron Keren regarding his extraordinary book that he has published from his grandfather's memoir called Beneath the Lightless Sky, that has been extraordinary in its depth, breadth, and suspense, and humanity, and inhumanity as well, which we will delve into the deeper lessons in just a moment. So thank you very much. Once again, this is Habits of a Whole Heart on hmTV through the Humanity Matters series. Thank you for tuning in.